Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'll give a quick review of what's been going on with me in my agricultural development work in Jesus' name, and then we'll talk a little bit about being old. God has really blessed. I've spent, if you wonder I'm not here for weeks at a time, it's not because somebody offended me or something. It's because I'm away. All of the month of June I was in West Africa working with agricultural training in the northern part of Sierra Leone and working with cocoa farmers in the southern part of Sierra Leone. As you know from me talking before, perhaps, that I'm helping to restore cocoa farms that were abandoned during their civil war and giving people way of making income again that they haven't had for 20 some years. God's really blessed. I've been off since the end of June, and I'll be going back August 9th here in a week or two to Malawi to work with agricultural training there, and then I'll be going from there to Rwanda to help establish a training center in Rwanda for training leaders in that part of the world. We've got the All Africa Baptist Fellowship, who has asked us to help train trainers who can push it through their conventions, and they want all of their member churches to have this week-long conservation agriculture training because things are bad over there, and you know, people say, well, I can't find stuff at the food line up here. Over there, it's worse. You know, the prices are going up. They don't have any money to begin with. The prices are going up, and things are starting to be hard to find because of problems with the supply chain, and of course inflation is affecting them as well. And so we feel like we got to pedal faster, and I'm asking God to help provide the resources so we can do more in faster time, because it's getting more critical. There is less food security all the time in Africa and much of the tropics. So yes, sir. A lot of times I do, yeah. Which is interesting speaking, because you have to speak in sentences and then stop. And if you've got somebody who's good, you can start speaking as they're wrapping up. You can get a rhythm going, but it takes almost twice as long to deliver a message or a teaching there. So I'm glad I don't have to do that for you guys. So anyway, keep praying for us. The situation is very bad, but God is providing, and we're just trying to pedal as fast as we can. I foresee being away a lot this year. I had 10 separate trips last year that God enabled us to take, about 2 to 3 weeks apart, a total each trip, and I'm seeing it being that way again this year. But if you have your Bibles, we're going to talk about Joshua. A little while ago, someone stood up here. I don't know how long it's been, and they had a great message. It wasn't so great to remember who it was, but whoever it was, they quoted a passage out of Joshua 23, and it stuck with me all this time. And when Brother Dick asked for me to talk, I thought I'm going to talk from Joshua chapter 23. So I want to read a portion of 23. I'm going to skip around with some of the verses, but I want to talk about what it means to come to our end of our lives and look back and wonder how we've done. Joshua 23. A long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and heads, its judges and officers, and said to them, I am now old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. Behold, I have allotted to you an inheritance for your tribes, those nations that remain, along with all the nations that I have already cut off from the Jordan to the great sea in the west. The Lord your God will push them back before you, and will drive them out of your sight, and you shall possess their land, just as the Lord your God promised you. Therefore, be very strong to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mention of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. And he goes on to tell this big crowd of leaders of Israel what they need to do. In verse 11 he says, be very careful therefore to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you, and make marriages with them, so that you associate with them, and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive these nations out before you. And then verse 14, and now I'm about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. And God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Joshua charged the leaders of Israel. He said, I'm old and I'm bidding you farewell. It's time for me to step aside. I'm old and I'm getting ready to pass. And all that God promised, nothing has failed. What a blessing it would be for us to get to the end of our life and say, nothing that God had my hand set to do has failed. That on our dying lips, God has allowed me to be successful. How will people remember us? Joshua is pointing out that he is going and he wants Israel to see what God has done during his lifetime. He's not lifting himself up. He's telling them, while I have been alive, look at what God has done. He has given us success. And so when we think of all of us in here with gray hair, some of us more than others, not more hair than others, but some of us are more gray than others. But when we think about approaching death, how do we look at what we will be leaving behind? If I said to you, we're talking about some lady, and I said, she's quite elderly now. She's quite elderly now. What's the vision that comes to your head? Do you think some sweet lady, or do you think of some cranky old hag? Do you think of grandma, your grandmother baking pies in the kitchen? When I think of a sweet old lady, I think of Ralph and my grandmother, Edna Cooley. I think of her wearing this apron all the time with her dress. I think of her always in the kitchen, always baking something. You go in the house, and the kitchen is right there. It's just steamy from stuff baking. And maybe that's a memory you have. Do you think of that? Or do you think of the witch trying to bake Hansel and Gretel in a pie? What do we think about when we think of being old? How will people remember us? I must admit, I would like to know, maybe you will admit as well, will people say our life has been a success or a failure? Will people say, and we wonder, did I succeed or did I not succeed? How did I do? What was my score at life? Many look back at their lives and think, what a waste. There are a lot of people, famous people, who have gotten to the end of their life and they've looked back and they think, oh, what a waste. I wasted my life. Lots of millionaires, there's stories of millionaires in the process of dying, and they're regretful. They don't have any families around them. They're dying alone. And they wonder, well, what's the deal? No one ever died wishing they had spent more time at the office. Normally people die, they wish they'd spent more time with their children or with their spouses or with their family. Many people face death with regrets of how they lived their lives. They feel emptiness when they see the time growing short. And a lot of people wish they could do it over. Now, I have things in my life that I regret spending time or energy or money on. And maybe I'm the only one. I doubt it, but I'm sure you could probably work up something that was in your life that you would do over. A direction you may have taken a different fork in the road. But we are all here looking back to some degree. We don't have as far ahead as we have behind, okay? But we do have time ahead, and that's what I want to focus on, because that's what Joshua was focusing on. Everyone here, if you're not alive in here this morning, raise your hand. Okay, so everybody here is alive. That means we have time left. Okay? Everybody in here has time remaining. It's not too late to get past failure in our lives. Lamentations has a verse. If you study Lamentations, it's kind of depressing off and on, but mostly on. But Lamentations is an amazing book to dig deep into. And at one point, Jeremiah is so distraught because God has totally turned Israel over to the Babylonians and the Chaldeans, and they are being crushed. I mean, women are boiling their babies for food. It's horrible. It's a very, very dismal situation. He's about to be completely lost into despair. And then he remembers that God's mercies are new every morning. And that's where the song, Great is Thy Faithfulness, comes from. Brother Dave Powell's one of his favorite hymns. Great is Thy Faithfulness. If I was Ralph, I would sing it this morning and get everybody to sing along. He's a song guy. But maybe in a less formal setting, we have Yogi Berra, who said, "It ain't over until it's over." We can, with God's providence, wipe out failure and replace it with success in God's eyes. We're all alive. We still have, at least this morning, to some point, I've prayed nothing happens to any of us this morning, but we have time. We're here. We're alive. So what will we do? Joshua, he was the general of Israel's army, and he was done. He knew it. Every bone in his body was telling him, "Hey, you're done." It's time for you to get ready to move on the way of the earth. The way of the earth, meaning everything dies. Joshua knew that he didn't have much time left. He knew that he was no longer the general that was going to lead Israel's army into rigorous battle as he once did. He had been named by Moses as a young man to lead Israel as Moses was buried by God, and he turned it over to Joshua. And Joshua worked hard. He took the people into the land of promise. He rallied the people behind him, and he summoned Israel's energies. And he had stunning victories. Jericho, Ai, Gibeon, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron. Joshua had succeeded wonderfully. From the north to the south of the land of Canaan, everyone knew the power and skill of General Joshua. But now he was old. He's measuring his years that had gone by. He's taking stock in his own heart of what he had done. He's asking, has my life been a failure? Has my life worked the way that it should have in God's eyes. So how does he answer it? How does he answer this? Well, in the passage, those first 16 verses of chapter 23, when he asks if he was a failure, he says no. He could say no because he learned to live by faith and not by sight. He was a visionary. He could see the success. He could see the victory that God would give. And he moved forward. He was being led by God, and he was being driven by a vision that God had for him, not by any other kind of measuring stick, not by any earthly success measurements. Sometimes people want to measure their life by worldly yardsticks like money, bank accounts, or degrees, initials after their names. That seems to be popular with some people. If we do that, if we try to measure our life by the size of a bank account or the size of initials after our name or by our title or something like that, we will always be a failure. God will not consider us a success. He's not impressed. He's not impressed by those things. If we measure our life by vision, if we measure our life by what we have believed that God will do through us, then we can look back and we can say, yeah, we were a success. We can see what God has done, and we can be captivated by his planning and his marvelous work in our lives, and we can be a success. Like I said, some of us in here are pretty old, but God's not impressed with the fact that you've stayed alive. Okay, staying alive in itself is not a thing. Look at old Methuselah. He was 900 and whatever years old, 69. And then it says, and he died. He died. Oh well. Okay, that's what it says. What else? Not much. Just living out our years, staying alive, is not a measure of our success. And like I said, we don't measure it by dollars in the bank account. We read in the news of people who have amassed millions of dollars. Who is the most wealthy? You know, this man is the 5th wealthiest in the world. You hear about Elon Musk all the time, and God's not impressed with that. Anybody know who Howard Hughes was? Howard Hughes, multi-millionaire. Died curled up in a ball, afraid of everything. He had phobias about germs. He was a suspicious, lonely recluse when he died. Millions and millions of dollars, could have anything he wanted. He was afraid of everything, despite his great wealth. Now you don't measure success by dollars in the bank or in your mattress or in your cookie jar, wherever you keep your money. That's not how God measures it. And Joshua was not measuring the success that he had given Israel through his leadership that way either. We can measure leadership on our own from our own successes. Did you hear about the guy out here in Route 11 standing the other day with a big fan? You know the little fan you have some churches have because they're hot? This guy had this giant fan, and he was fanning this fan along Route 11. You didn't see him, you were out here. And somebody walked up and said, well, what are you doing? He said, this is a fan to keep the elephants away. And, well, there's no elephants around here. He said, I'm successful. Well, it worked. job I'm doing. So when Joshua asked himself whether his life had been a failure, he could say, no, my life has not been a failure. I learned to live by faith and not by sight. Secondly, Joshua asked whether his life had been a failure. He could say no, because he knew that he had not done everything, that he had left things for the next generation to be involved in. He told them, I have given you, these lands are before you, and God will give them to your hands as well, as long as you stay in the path. As long as you do not go to the right or the left, follow after the nations that we've conquered that still have people, take their gods for you instead of the real God, our God. If you stay in the straight and narrow, God will have these nations fall before you. He will push them out, and you will continue to obtain the promised land. He had left them work to do. He knew he hadn't done it all. He had left some of the job for the next generation. Thirdly, Joshua could ask, has my life been a failure? He could say no, because he had enough wisdom, he had learned enough to be able to pass on this advice to the people behind him. He gave them this advice. Stay on the course. Stay in the path that God has set before us. Follow his laws. And he passed this on to the generations that were following him. And that's something we can emulate. You know, we may think, well, you know, I'm not a preacher. I'm not up in front of people all the time. You've got kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews. There are people, kids across the street. There are people we can influence in the next generations that follow. We can influence for the cause of Christ and for the kingdom. And when Joshua asked if his life could be a failure, he could say no, because he warned them of these pitfalls. He said, you know, don't be marrying with these pagan nations, these pagan women. Don't let your people intermarry with them. It will be nothing but disaster. And he was right. So if we can finish our lives by living with vision instead of worldly accomplishments, then we can say our lives have been a success. We can say we finished well. If we can pass something on to empower others to follow the way of the Lord and to live in the leading of the Holy Spirit, if we can do that, then we can say our lives have been a success. They have not been a failure. If we can share wisdom that you only get from being old, if we can share that wisdom with the generations that follow and give them the advice that will help them follow the ways of God instead of following the ways of man, if we can give them wisdom like that, then we can say our lives were a success. They were not a failure. If I can understand and receive the gift of grace in my life to spend the remaining time, whether it's until 2 o'clock this afternoon or whether it's another 20 years, if I can do that and ask God to give me the opportunities to continue to work for Him and to have vision as to what He might do, then we can say, I can say God has given me success and not failure. If I can, as Joshua told them, if I can go out with the idea that God has loved me and that I can still give His love to others, show His love to others, then I can go out saying my life has been a success and not a failure. So even though we're all old here this morning, we're not dead. We're all here, we're all going to eat, we're all moving around. I haven't seen anybody drop over the entire time I've been talking. So none of us have an excuse. We're not done yet. Okay? So let's go to prayer. And Roy, I'll ask you to start, and I'll close. And whoever would like to pray in between, please feel free.